No, man, I'll have the bologna delivered, I swear.
Well, okay, that's fine, I guess.
Sorry, it's just, I've been so busy, I don't even know what month it is.
You know it's October, right?
October? What? Alright, it's the month of October and you know what that means. Halloween is right around the corner. And since one of my favorite things to do during the Halloween season is to watch movies, okay, so watching movies is my favorite thing to do year round, but this year I thought I'd take advantage of it and make this video series about my favorite movies to watch during Halloween. Now this isn't going to be just another history of horror movies type video. In fact, some of the movies on this list aren't even scary movies, they're just movies that are fun to watch during Halloween. So without further ado, this is Halloween Movie Month. That's hot. Alright, so the first movie on this list I shall talk about is Ridley Scott's Alien. If you were to ask most people what is the scariest science fiction movie of all time, anyone with sense in their skulls would have to say Alien. In fact, it's probably the greatest science fiction horror movie ever. The story is actually pretty iconic. It's actually 10 little Indians, and then there were none, on a spaceship. A dangerous alien boards a spacecraft and tries to eat and consume all of the passengers on the spacecraft. And what a dark spacecraft it is! Have you not heard of lights, people? We actually watched this movie in my script analysis class. We watched mostly just clips of different other movies to talk about the script and analyze it. But one day the teacher just came in one day and was like, alright guys, I'm sick of teaching, we're gonna watch Alien. In space, no one can hear you, I scream. Next, I watched Ghost Story. This is a movie from 1981 starring 4 elderly men, one played by Fred Astaire, who are all being haunted by a ghost from their past. I had actually never seen this movie before. The story is pretty straightforward. These 4 elderly men are being haunted by a ghost from their past, and to talk about any more would kind of spoil it just a little bit more, even though the story is pretty straightforward. I'm a sucker for ghost movies, and this has some pretty interesting looking scares in it. I'd say it's worth a look if you're a fan of ghost movies, but other than that, it's not an amazing movie. It's a little slow. It's kind of like a episode of Tales from the Crypt that's been elongated to 2 hours or an hour and a half, however long it was. But there are a few spooky moments, and I'm glad I saw it. Next, I watched Troll Hunters. This is another movie that I had never seen before, but somebody kept IMing me on Facebook saying you have to watch the movie. So it's on Netflix, so I watched the movie. I'm actually usually not a big fan of found footage movies, but this one was really, really good. For the first 20 minutes or so, you kind of feel like you know where it's going. But there is some really good build up to actually seeing the trolls, which look amazing, by the way. The CGI looks absolutely fantastic. And then this movie becomes kind of this awesome suspenseful journey where you follow this troll hunter and just watch him capture a bunch of trolls, and an airplane is flying over me now. So as you go along, you kind of learn the mythology of these trolls, and the movie's really well paced. It just really delivers on the coolness factor, which I appreciate. They're supposed to be making an American remake to this movie. I don't really see how they could make it any better than it already is, but my mind is open. You know, brain is open to the world. Next, I watched Frankenstein, which I don't actually own, but I wanted, and it just came out on Blu-ray, along with a bunch of other monster movie universal types. You know the story of Frankenstein, I know the story of Frankenstein, but a lot of people haven't actually watched this movie, which they should. Dr. Henry Frankenstein creates a monster in an attempt to play God and bring life into a once dead being. Everything about this movie is iconic. From the laboratory to the hunchback assistant to the monster with the square head and the bolts around his neck. The monster, by the way, brilliantly played by Boris Karloff. Like I said, most people haven't actually seen the movie. They only know about Frankenstein through cartoons, through cereal commercials, through other stuff, through parodies. And though the classic movies from the 30s and 40s are dated, they're still really, really good in their own right and still have some very, very creepy things in them. Just on their own, they have a lot of atmosphere, and I think they're worth seeing just because they set the standard for everything in horror that was to come. I also think they're a lot of fun to watch, especially on a dark and stormy night. So they're horror movie staples, and I think they deserve to be looked at. Next I watched Let Me In, which apparently Stephen King thinks is one of the best American horror movies in the last 20 years. It's actually hard to argue with him because this is a really, really, really good movie. This is actually a remake of a Swedish film called Let the Right One In, and it is about a vampire who looks like a 12-year-old girl, and she befriends a creepy boy who lives next door to her. It actually sounds like kind of a quirky little kids movie. It is charming in its own way, but it is definitely a horror movie with lots of violence, lots of blood, and lots of horrific things that happen. It's actually a really sad and beautiful movie about the loss of innocence, and it also has some really stark imagery and some very, very dark themes, obviously. And this is probably a little bit controversial because I actually like the remake better. And yes, I have seen the remake more than once. There were just some changes that I thought worked better, and overall I just think it's a better movie. Moving on, next I watched Dead Alive, aka Peter Jackson's Brain Dead. Because you see, kids, before Peter Jackson was winning your imaginations and your hearts with The Lord of the Rings, he was making cheap and very, very gory horror movies. It's about a man named Lionel and his very overbearing mother. One day, his mother gets accidentally bitten by a rat monkey, which upon biting people causes them to turn into zombies. I hate it when that happens. In America, it's called Dead or Alive, but in New Zealand, where it was actually filmed, it's called Brain Dead, and I really wish this was called Brain Dead. I wish this said Brain Dead on it because I love the title Brain Dead. So you may wonder, this doesn't sound very iconic. Why include this on the list? This, ladies and gentlemen, is the goriest movie ever. How gory? The goriest. No other movie even comes close. The VHS copy of this movie was distributed in video stores with vomit bags. Why do I always watch this movie after I eat? The movie is also very silly, and it knows it's silly. It's just interesting to watch this movie and think that the same guy that made this won a buttload of Oscars for adapting one of the most famous novels of all time. Now and then in this movie, there are some shots that you see and you're kind of like, that was in The Lord of the Rings. The DVD also still has the cigarette burns in the corner, which is cool. Next, I watched VHS, which I think came out last year. It is a horror found footage compilation movie, which means it combines the techniques of found footage with the also gimmicks of being a compilation, which is little stories to make up one story. A lot of my friends who like horror movies were recommending it to me, so I gave it a watch. This is the first time I'd ever watched this one. And I thought some of the little vignettes were pretty good, particularly the first one with the scary girl. I don't know how else to describe her besides just saying the scary girl. And the very last one, which was about these guys who end up going to a haunted house basically on Halloween. That one I didn't think was very scary, but it was a lot of fun because I like haunted house movies, and there were just a lot of cool haunted house movies in it that I was like, I want to see that in an actual movie, not just a found footage movie. It's on Netflix if you want to check it out. Apparently they just made a sequel that just came out this year, and I want to see it. I want to check it out. Next, I watched William Castle's House on Haunted Hill, which is also on Netflix. William Castle was a director who did a lot of gimmicky things. There's a skeleton in the movie that, walks around and is a skeleton and boo. And what William Castle would do in the 1950s is that when people would go see his movies, when the skeleton would pop up on the screen, he would have a real skeleton fly across the audience to try to scare everybody in the audience. He was basically trying to make movies 4D, or basically trying to make movies more of an amusement park type experience. And I wish we still did stuff like that today, but now it's just kind of not very practical unless you did, in a theater in New York or a theater in LA. Vincent Price is really good in the movie. As always, I don't think Vincent Price is ever bad. Like I said, I am a sucker for haunted house movies, so I watched this movie in the dark, late at night, and even though it's a cheesy movie from the 1950s, it was creeping me out a little bit. So if those kind of movies are your thing, you should definitely watch this one. Next movie I watched was I thought I'd throw in a documentary on the list. And since I like multiple of the Friday the 13th movies, I think 1 is really good, I think 4 is really good in a completely different way. Most of people talk about the Friday the 13th movies being all of the same kind of thing, but they're different in their own sort of scary to cheesiness levels. And a lot of people know about Friday the 13th, so I thought I'd talk about this documentary called His Name Was Jason. And it's an hour-and-a-half documentary that pretty much just is a compilation of interviews with the people involved. The box says it right. It's more of a retrospective than an actual documentary. They don't go too deep into the making-ofs of the movie. It's more of a kind of people looking back and talking about the franchise as a whole and its impact on horror and Jason alone as a character. So if you're a fan of Friday the 13th, you should definitely, I think this is worth a watch. I don't know if this is actually included on the new Friday the 13th Blu-ray that just came out, but it should be. And last on the list for this week, I'm going to talk about Scream. Now, Scream is actually one of my favorite scary movies of all time. I think I saw it for the first time when I was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and it both really scared me, and I thought it was just really, really interesting as a commentary on the horror genre in general. Also, Scream was actually the first movie that I ever bought on DVD, which now I have the Blu-ray because the DVD looks like crap. If you don't know anything about Scream, it's pretty much it's kind of a standard slasher movie that's wrapped in really clever dialogue and also just a really clever look and commentary on the scary movie slasher genre. It was also directed by Wes Craven, who did Nightmare on Elm Street and The Hills Have Eyes and a bunch of other bad movies. Watching this again, I was actually really surprised with how well this held up. Not so much on the scary movie end, but on just the more clever writing of it end. And I still think it's a pretty relevant, pretty really, really, really good movie today. Alright, so that's it for this episode of Halloween Movie Month. Make sure you come back next week for some more Halloween movies.